I'm Robert Mitchell, I'm 68 years old, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. But here I am, and I need you to hear every word of what happened next. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest. Also, let me know what city you're listening from. Right now I'm sitting in my favorite armchair, the same one I've had for 30 years, looking out at the garden my late wife Sarah planted. The roses are blooming beautifully this spring. But 3 weeks ago I thought I'd never see this view again. 3 weeks ago my son David tried to throw me out of my own house. He thought he was so clever, so smart. He had no idea what was coming for him. You see, David always thought I was just a simple old man who didn't understand modern business or legal matters. He thought because I worked with my hands my whole life as a carpenter that I was stupid. Boy, was he wrong. But let me start from the beginning, because this story goes back further than you might think. My wife Sarah died 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Those last months were the hardest of my life. David seemed supportive then. He'd come by every few days, help with groceries, drive Sarah to her doctor appointments when I couldn't. I thought, finally, my son is showing he cares about family. I was so grateful to have him there during the worst time of my life. After Sarah passed, I was lost. This house felt too big, too empty, too full of memories. David suggested I might want to consider moving somewhere smaller, maybe a nice retirement community. At first I said no. This house was where Sarah and I built our life together. Every room had a story, every corner held a memory. But as the months went by, the loneliness got heavier. David kept bringing it up. Dad, you're getting older. What if you fall and no one's around? What if you have a medical emergency? This house is too much work for you now. He painted this picture of me as a helpless old man who couldn't take care of himself. And honestly, some days I felt that way. Some days I wondered if he was right. Then David came to me with what he called a solution. Dad, he said, why don't you sign the house over to me? That way, if anything happens to you, there won't be any legal complications. You can live here as long as you want, but technically I'll be the owner. It'll make everything easier for taxes and inheritance and all that complicated stuff you don't need to worry about. I should have seen the red flags. I should have asked more questions. But I was grieving, I was lonely, and I trusted my son. So 6 months ago I signed the papers. David assured me it was just a formality, just paperwork to make things simpler. He promised nothing would change. I could live in my house for the rest of my life. For the first few months nothing did change. David still came by occasionally. We'd have dinner together sometimes. He seemed like the caring son I'd always hoped he would become. But then things started shifting. Small things at first. He'd make comments about how I should keep the house cleaner. He'd suggest I was letting the yard go. He'd point out repairs that needed to be done and sigh like it was such a burden. Then the visits became less frequent. When he did come by, he seemed impatient, like he had better places to be. He'd check his phone constantly during our conversations. He'd cut visits short, saying he had important business to attend to. I started to feel like I was bothering him just by existing in my own home. The real change came about 2 months ago. David started bringing up the idea of me moving again, but this time it wasn't a suggestion. Dad, he said, I've been thinking. This house is worth a lot of money now. The market is really good. Maybe it's time for you to downsize to something more appropriate for your age. I could sell this place and help you find a nice little apartment. I told him I wasn't ready to move. This was my home. Sarah and I had planned to live here until the end. He got frustrated with me. Dad, you're being stubborn. You're not thinking clearly. This house is too much for you. You're going to hurt yourself trying to maintain it. I'm trying to help you here. But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't about helping me. This was about money. David had always struggled financially. He'd made some bad business decisions over the years, had some failed investments. I'd helped him out more times than I could count, but apparently that wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted everything. The conversations became arguments. David would come over and pressure me to agree to sell. He'd bring up every little thing that was wrong with the house, every repair that needed to be done. He'd make me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting to stay in my own home. The home I'd paid for with 40 years of hard work. 3 weeks ago, everything came to a head. David showed up at my door with an envelope in his hand and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Cold, determined, almost cruel. Dad, he said, we need to talk. This has gone on long enough. I've been patient with you, but you're not being rational about this situation. He sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Sarah used to make breakfast every morning for 30 years. He opened the envelope and pulled out official-looking papers. "Dad," he said, "I've talked to a lawyer. Since I'm the legal owner of this house now, I have the right to make decisions about it. I'm giving you 30 days to find somewhere else to live." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "David," I said, "this is my home. You promised I could live here for the rest of my life. You said it was just paperwork." He shrugged like it meant nothing. "Things change, Dad. I need to sell this house. The market won't stay this good forever. You'll be fine. There are plenty of nice senior living places around here. That's when I got angry." "David," I said, "I trusted you. I signed those papers because you were my son, and I believed you when you said you just wanted to help me. This is my house. I built half of it with my own hands. Your mother planted that garden. We raised you in this house. How can you just throw me out like I'm nothing?" And that's when he said those words that are burned into my memory forever. "Get out of my house, old man. You're nothing but a burden now. I don't owe you anything. You had your life, now it's time for me to have mine. And if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have you evicted legally." I sat there in shock as my own son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd helped countless times, threatened to have me thrown out of my own home like a common criminal. He left the eviction notice on my table and walked out without another word. I heard his car start up and drive away, and I was alone with the devastating reality of what had just happened. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my chair, looking around at everything Sarah and I had built together. The family photos on the mantel, the furniture we'd saved up to buy piece by piece, the scratches on the doorframe where we'd measured David's height as he grew up. How could the same boy who'd been so excited to show us he'd grown another inch now be trying to throw me out of the home where those memories were made? But as the shock wore off, something else started to take its place. Anger, determination, and something David had clearly forgotten about his old man. I might be 68 years old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm definitely not helpless. David was about to learn that the hard way. The next morning, I made a phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My old friend, Jim Patterson. Jim and I had worked construction together for over 20 years before he went back to school and became a lawyer. We'd stayed in touch over the years, but not closely. I knew he had his own practice now, specializing in elder law and estate planning. "Jim," I said when he answered the phone, "it's Robert Mitchell. I need your help with something, and it's urgent." When I told him what David had done, the silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Robert," he finally said, "are you telling me your son tricked you into signing over your house and now he's trying to evict you?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Jim, and I need to know if there's anything I can do about it." Jim told me to come to his office immediately and bring any paperwork I had. "Don't sign anything else," he said. "Don't agree to anything. And whatever you do, don't leave that house." Jim's office was in a tall building downtown, the kind of place that made me feel a little intimidated. But when I saw Jim, all that nervousness went away. He looked older, grayer, but he still had the same honest face I remembered from our construction days. He hugged me like we were still the young men who used to eat lunch together on job sites. "Robert," he said as we sat down in his office, "tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave out any details." So I did. I told him about Sarah's death, about my loneliness, about David's gradual pressure to sign over the house. I told him about the promises David had made and how he'd broken every single one of them. Jim listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it wasn't sad either. It was the smile of someone who knew something the other person didn't. "Robert," he said, "I have some very good news for you. What David did to you is called elder abuse. It's also fraud. He used your grief and your trust to manipulate you into signing over your property under false pretenses. That makes the transfer legally questionable at best. But more importantly, even if the transfer was legal, he can't just evict you. You have tenant rights, and in some cases, you might have what's called a life estate." I didn't understand all the legal terms, but I understood enough. There was hope. "Jim," I said, "what do we need to do?" "First," he said, "we're going to file an injunction to stop any eviction proceedings. Then we're going to challenge the property transfer itself. And if David wants to play hardball, we're going to show him what hardball really looks like. But Jim, I said, I don't have a lot of money for legal fees. I'm living on Social Security and a small pension. Jim waved his hand dismissively. Robert, you saved my life more than once on those construction sites. You think I'm going to charge you to save your home? We're going to do this pro bono, and we're going to win. Over the next few days, Jim worked fast. He filed papers with the court, sent official letters to David, and started building our case. Meanwhile, I went home and did something David would never expect. I started documenting everything, every conversation we'd had about the house, every promise he'd made, every lie he'd told. I also started making some phone calls of my own. You see, David had always underestimated his old man. He thought because I worked with my hands that I didn't know important people. But when you've been in construction for 40 years, you meet a lot of folks. Contractors, real estate developers, city officials, people who remember when you did good work for them. One of those people was Margaret Chen, who was now a city councilwoman. I'd built a beautiful deck for her family about 15 years ago, and we'd stayed friendly over the years. When I called and told her what was happening, she was outraged. Robert, she said, this is exactly the kind of elder abuse we've been trying to combat in this city. Let me make some calls. Another call I made was to Tom Rodriguez, who owned the biggest construction company in town. Tom and I had worked together on several projects over the years. He'd always said if I ever needed anything, just to call. Well, now I needed something. Tom, I said, I need to know everything you can find out about my son David's financial situation. I think he's in deeper trouble than he's letting on. What Tom found out was very interesting. David hadn't just made bad investments, he was in serious debt. He owed money to several creditors, and some of them were getting impatient. He'd taken out loans against his own house, maxed out his credit cards, and was facing the possibility of bankruptcy. No wonder he was so desperate to sell my house. He needed the money to save himself. But the most interesting thing Tom discovered was that David had already been talking to real estate agents about selling my house. He'd even had it appraised. The house was worth almost $400,000, more than enough to solve all of David's financial problems. The only thing standing in his way was me. A week after David had served me with the eviction notice, Jim called with an update. Robert, he said, I have some very good news. The judge granted our injunction. David can't evict you while we're challenging the property transfer. But that's not the best part. The best part is that David's lawyer called me this morning. They want to negotiate. What does that mean? I asked. It means David is scared, Jim said. His lawyer knows this case is a loser for them. They're hoping to work out some kind of deal before this goes to court and becomes public record. Because if this goes to trial, David's going to look very bad. Elder abuse cases get a lot of media attention, especially when they involve family members. I thought about that. David had always been concerned about his image, about what people thought of him. The idea of being publicly exposed as someone who tried to steal his elderly father's house would be devastating to him. But I wasn't sure I wanted to negotiate. I wanted justice. Jim, I said, what kind of deal do you think they want to make? Probably they'll offer to let you stay in the house for a certain number of years, or they'll offer to buy you out for some amount of money. But Robert, I think we can do better than that. I think we can get your house back completely. How? I asked. Because I've been digging into the paperwork David had you sign, and I found something very interesting. The transfer document has some problems with it. It wasn't properly witnessed, and more importantly, David didn't disclose his financial situation to you when he asked you to sign it. That's a material omission that could invalidate the entire transfer. 2 days later, I got a call from David. It was the first time I'd heard from him since he'd served me with the eviction notice. Dad, he said, and his voice sounded different. Strained, worried. I think we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding about this whole house situation. A misunderstanding, I said. David, you served me with an eviction notice. You told me to get out of my own house. You called me a burden. What part of that was a misunderstanding? Dad, he said, I was stressed about money. I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe we can work something out. I told him I'd think about it and hung up, but I wasn't really thinking about working anything out. I was thinking about something else entirely, something that would teach David a lesson he'd never forget. You see, while Jim was working on the legal side of things, I'd been doing some investigating of my own, and what I discovered was that David's financial problems were even worse than Tom had found out. David wasn't just in debt. He was about to lose everything. His house, his car, his business, everything. And I'd also discovered something else, something that gave me an idea for the perfect way to handle this situation. David's house, the one he'd bought 5 years ago with money I'd lent him for the down payment, was about to go into foreclosure. He'd missed 3 mortgage payments, and the bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. That's when I came up with my plan. It was risky and it would cost me most of my savings, but it would be worth it to see the look on David's face when he realized what had happened. I called Jim and told him what I wanted to do. "Robert," he said, "are you sure about this? It's a big gamble. I'm sure, Jim, David wants to play games with real estate. Let's play games with real estate, but let's make sure I win this time." The thing is, David had no idea about the money Sarah and I had saved over the years. We'd been careful with our finances, invested wisely, and lived below our means. When Sarah got sick, we'd used some of our savings for her medical care, but there was still a substantial amount left. Money that David didn't know existed. Sarah had always been the one who handled our investments. She was smart with money, much smarter than David ever gave her credit for. She'd put money into stocks, bonds, and a few real estate investments that had grown significantly over the years. After she died, I'd mostly ignored those accounts, letting them sit there while I grieved. But now I had a reason to pay attention to them. I called our financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who had worked with Sarah for years. "Patricia," I said, "I need to liquidate some investments. I need cash, and I need it fast." When I told her why, she was shocked. "Robert," she said, "that's terrible. But yes, we can definitely get you the cash you need." Within a week, I had access to more money than David could have imagined. Enough to buy his house outright from the bank. Enough to teach him a lesson about respect and family, and what happens when you try to take advantage of people who love you. The next week, David called again. This time, he sounded desperate. "Dad," he said, "my lawyer says this could get really ugly if it goes to court. I don't want to fight with you. You're my father. Maybe we can figure out a way for both of us to be happy." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, even though I already knew what he was going to say. "Well," he said, "what if I let you stay in the house for the rest of your life, and when you pass away, I inherit it? That way you get to stay home, and I eventually get the property. It's a win-win situation." I pretended to consider it. "David," I said, "that sounds reasonable, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want everything in writing, legally documented, so there's no confusion later. And I want my own lawyer to review everything before I sign anything." "Of course, Dad." "That's totally fair." I could hear the relief in his voice. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd convinced the stupid old man to go along with his plan. He had no idea what was really about to happen. The meeting was set for the following Friday at Jim's office. David would bring his lawyer, I'd have Jim, and we'd work out all the details. David seemed excited about it when we talked on the phone. He kept saying how glad he was that we could work things out like a family should. But while David was celebrating his apparent victory, I was putting the final pieces of my plan into place. On Wednesday, I met with a representative from the bank that held David's mortgage. I made them an offer they couldn't refuse, a cash purchase of the property for the full amount owed, plus enough extra to make it worth their while to expedite the process. The bank was thrilled. They'd been dealing with David's missed payments for months, and the foreclosure process was expensive and time-consuming. Having someone come in with cash to buy the property outright was like a gift from heaven. They agreed to complete the sale by Thursday afternoon, one day before my meeting with David. Thursday evening, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Mr. Mitchell, the bank representative, said, "Congratulations, you are now the owner of 1247 Maple Street. All the paperwork has been filed, and the deed transfer is complete. Your son is now officially your tenant, though he doesn't know it yet." Friday morning came, and I got dressed in my best suit. The same suit I'd worn to Sarah's funeral. I wanted to look respectable, dignified. I wanted David to see that his old man wasn't the helpless fool he thought he was. I arrived at Jim's office a few minutes early. Jim had prepared everything we needed, and he'd also prepared a few surprises that David wasn't expecting. When David and his lawyer arrived, David seemed nervous but hopeful. He shook my hand and said, "Dad, I'm really glad we're doing this. I never wanted things to get so complicated between us. His lawyer was a young guy in an expensive suit who looked like he thought this was going to be easy money. He probably figured he was just going to draw up some simple paperwork for a family agreement. He had no idea what he was walking into. Jim started the meeting by laying out the basic framework of what David thought we were agreeing to. David would retain ownership of the house, but I would have the legal right to live there for the rest of my life. Upon my death, the house would pass to David, free and clear. It sounded simple enough. But then Jim said, "Before we finalize anything, there are a few other matters we need to discuss. David, are you aware that your father has some concerns about your financial stability?" David's face went pale. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well," Jim said, opening a folder, "we've done some research into your current financial situation, and it appears you're facing some significant challenges. Foreclosure proceedings on your own home, multiple creditors seeking payment, potential bankruptcy. These are all matters that could affect your ability to maintain the property we're discussing today." David's lawyer looked confused. He clearly hadn't been told about any of this. "David, is this true?" he asked. David stammered something about temporary cash flow problems, but Jim wasn't finished. In fact, Jim continued, "We've discovered that your house is scheduled for foreclosure auction next Tuesday. That's in 4 days. Were you planning to mention that to your father? Because it seems relevant to this discussion." The room went completely silent. David looked like he wanted to disappear. His lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, and I just sat there, waiting for the next part of Jim's presentation. "But here's the interesting thing," Jim said, pulling out another set of papers. "Yesterday, Mr. Mitchell made an offer on your house, David, a cash offer to the bank to stop the foreclosure. And this morning that offer was accepted." David's mouth fell open. "What are you talking about?" he said. "Dad, what is he talking about?" I stood up and looked my son in the eye. "David," I said, "as of this morning, I own your house, the same way you thought you owned mine." "But that's impossible," David said. "You don't have that kind of money." "Actually, I do," I said. "You see, son, while you were busy trying to steal my house, I was busy liquidating some investments your mother and I made years ago. Investments you didn't know about. Investments that gave me enough cash to buy your house outright." David turned to his lawyer. "Can he do that? Is that legal?" The lawyer nodded slowly. "If he made a legitimate offer and the bank accepted it, then yes, it's completely legal." "David, why didn't you tell me your house was in foreclosure?" Jim smiled and pulled out one more set of papers. "And now, David, we'd like to make you an offer. You can continue to live in your house, but you'll be renting it from your father. The rent will be fair, but it will be due on time every month. And if you're ever late with the rent, or if you ever again threaten or mistreat your father, you'll be evicted immediately." David was shaking now. "This can't be happening," he said. "Dad, you can't do this to me. I'm your son." I said, "David, 3 weeks ago you told me I was nothing but a burden and tried to throw me out of my own home. Today I'm offering you a place to live and a chance to rebuild your life. The difference is I'm doing it with love, not greed." "But there's more," Jim said. "We're also prepared to offer you a deal on your father's house. If you sign over the deed back to him immediately, and if you agree to the rental terms for your house, then we'll consider this matter settled. No lawsuits, no public embarrassment, no criminal charges for elder abuse." David's lawyer whispered something in his ear. David looked defeated. "What if I don't agree?" he asked. Then Jim said, "We'll proceed with our lawsuit to invalidate the transfer of your father's house. We'll also make sure the media knows about this case. Elder abuse is a hot topic these days, and you'll still lose your house to foreclosure because that sale is already final." David sat there for a long time, staring at the papers in front of him. Finally, he looked up at me. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I was desperate and I made terrible decisions. I never should have tried to take your house away from you. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, and I felt sad for both of us." "David," I said, "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You need to learn that your actions affect other people, especially the people who love you." He signed the papers. All of them. The deed transfer giving me back my house. The rental agreement for his house. The agreement that he would never again try to claim ownership of my property. When it was all done, Jim shook hands with everyone and said the meeting was over. David's lawyer left quickly, probably embarrassed about the whole situation. David lingered for a moment. "Dad," he said, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, "you go home to your house, which you're renting from me, and you figure out how to rebuild your life the right way. With honesty, hard work, and respect for other people." "What about us?" he asked. "What about our relationship?" "That's up to you, David," I said. "I'm still your father, and I still love you, but I'm not going to let you take advantage of me ever again. If you want to rebuild our relationship, you're going to have to earn back my trust." He nodded and left without saying anything else. I sat in Jim's office for a few more minutes, trying to process what had just happened. "Jim," I said, "do you think I did the right thing?" Jim smiled. "Robert," he said, "you just taught your son one of the most important lessons of his life. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them face the consequences of their actions." That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, David has been paying his rent on time. He's also been working extra jobs to try to get his finances back in order. He calls me every few days, but our conversations are different now. He's more respectful, more humble. He asks about my health, about how I'm doing, about whether I need anything. Last Sunday, he came over for dinner. It was awkward at first. We sat at the same kitchen table where he'd served me with the eviction notice, but this time we were just a father and son trying to figure out how to be a family again. "David," I said, "I want you to understand something. I didn't do what I did to hurt you. I did it to teach you." "I know, Dad," he said, "and I learned. I learned that I was selfish and greedy, and that I was willing to hurt the person who loved me most just to solve my own problems. I learned that you're a lot smarter and stronger than I ever gave you credit for, and I learned that actions have consequences." We talked for hours that night, about his mother, about his childhood, about the mistakes we'd both made over the years. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was honest. And honesty was something that had been missing from our relationship for a long time. David told me about his financial problems, about how scared he'd been of losing everything. He told me about the pressure he'd felt to succeed, to live up to some image he had of what his life should be. He told me how ashamed he was of what he'd tried to do to me. I told him about the loneliness I'd felt after his mother died, about how desperate I'd been for family connection, that I'd ignored the warning signs of what he was planning. I told him about the betrayal I'd felt when he'd served me with that eviction notice, and about the satisfaction I'd felt when I'd turned the tables on him, but I also told him something else. "David," I said, "what I did to you, buying your house, that was about teaching you a lesson, but it wasn't about revenge. If you can prove to me that you've really learned from this, if you can show me that you understand what family really means, then maybe we can work out a different arrangement." "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean, maybe someday, when you've proven that you can be trusted, we can talk about me selling your house back to you. Not giving it to you, but selling it to you at a fair price with a payment plan you can afford, but only if you can prove that you've changed." His eyes filled with tears. "Dad," he said, "I don't deserve that kind of generosity from you, not after what I did." "Maybe not," I said, "but that's what family does. We give each other chances to be better than we were yesterday." Since then, David has been working hard to prove himself. He got a second job to help pay down his debts. He's been going to financial counseling to learn how to manage money better. He's been volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly people with home repairs and maintenance. He says it helps him understand what he almost did to me. Yesterday he brought me something. It was a wooden picture frame he'd made in his garage workshop. Inside was a photo of him, me, and his mother from about 10 years ago. We were all smiling, all happy. It was from before his mother got sick, before the financial problems, before everything went wrong between us. "Dad," he said, "I want you to have this. I want you to remember that even though I messed up really badly, there was a time when we were a real family, and I want to get back to that. I want to be the son you deserve to have." I put the picture on my mantle, right next to the photos of his mother. "David," I said, "you're already becoming that son. It's going to take time and it's going to take work, but I believe you can do it. I believe you can be better than the man who tried to steal my house." He hugged me then, and it felt like the first real hug we'd shared in years. Not the obligatory hugs you give at holidays or special occasions, but the kind of hug that says, "I love you and I'm sorry, and I want to do better," all at the same time. This morning, David called to check on me. He does that every morning now. "Dad," he said, How are you feeling today? Do you need anything from the store? Do you want me to come over and help with anything around the house? It's a small thing, but it means everything to me. I'm sitting here now, looking out at Sarah's garden, thinking about second chances and family, and the strange ways that love sometimes has to be tough to be real. David learned a hard lesson, but he learned it. And maybe that's worth more than if I'd just given in to his demands and let him get away with what he tried to do. People ask me if I'm angry about what David did. The truth is, I was angry. I was hurt and betrayed and furious that my own son would try to steal my home. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm proud. I'm proud that I stood up for myself. I'm proud that I taught my son an important lesson, and I'm proud that he was strong enough to learn from it. Some of you listening to this might think I was too harsh. Some of you might think I should have just forgiven David and moved on without all the legal drama. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. If I'd just rolled over and let David take my house, he never would have learned that what he was doing was wrong. Other people might think I should have been even tougher, that I should have pressed criminal charges, or made sure David lost everything. But that's not what family does either. Family teaches lessons, but family also offers redemption. Family gives second chances to people who prove they deserve them. The truth is, David and I are both different people now than we were 3 weeks ago. He's more humble, more respectful, more aware of how his actions affect other people. And I'm stronger, more confident, more sure of my own worth and my own rights. We're building a new relationship based on mutual respect instead of him thinking he could take advantage of his old man. Last week, David brought his girlfriend over for dinner. Her name is Lisa, and she's a nice woman who works as a nurse at the local hospital. During dinner, she told me how much David talks about me, about how much he respects me, and how sorry he is for the mistakes he made. She said he's been going to therapy to work on his issues with money and family relationships. After dinner, David and I sat on the back porch while Lisa helped clean up the dishes. "Dad," he said, "I want you to know that Lisa knows everything about what happened between us. I told her the whole story, about how I tried to steal your house and how you outsmarted me and taught me a lesson I'll never forget." "What did she say?" I asked. "She said she was glad you stood up to me," David replied. "She said any man who would try to steal his elderly father's house doesn't deserve to have that father in his life. She said I was lucky you gave me a second chance instead of just cutting me off completely." "Smart woman," I said. "Very smart," David agreed. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you think you'll ever be able to trust me again? Really trust me?" I thought about that question for a long time before I answered. "David," I said, "trust isn't something you get back all at once. It's something you rebuild slowly, day by day, choice by choice. Every time you call to check on me, every time you pay your rent on time, every time you treat me with respect, you're rebuilding that trust a little bit." "How long do you think it will take?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe months, maybe years. But the important thing is that you're willing to do the work. The important thing is that you understand that trust, once broken, has to be earned back." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Then David said something that surprised me. "Dad, I'm glad you bought my house. I'm glad you turned the tables on me. If you hadn't, I probably would have kept making the same mistakes over and over again. I needed to learn that lesson, even if it was painful." That's when I knew that David really had changed. When someone can be grateful for a hard lesson, when they can see that consequences were necessary for their growth, that's when you know they've truly learned something important. This weekend, David is going to help me plant some new flowers in Sarah's garden. It was his idea. He said he wants to help me take care of the things that are important to me, the way I took care of him when he was growing up. He said he wants to learn about the plants Sarah loved so he can help keep her memory alive. I think Sarah would be proud of how this all turned out. She always believed that people could change if they were given the right motivation. She always said that sometimes love has to be tough to be effective. I think she would approve of the lesson I taught David, and I think she would be happy to see him working so hard to become a better man. The other day I was going through some of Sarah's old things, and I found a letter she'd written to David years ago but never sent. It was during one of his financial rough patches when he'd come to us for help yet again. In the letter, she'd written about her concerns that we were enabling him, that we were preventing him from learning to stand on his own 2 feet. She wrote, "David, your father and I love you more than life itself. But love doesn't mean always saying yes. Love doesn't mean protecting you from every consequence of your choices. Sometimes love means letting you fall, so you can learn to get back up on your own. We've been so afraid of seeing you struggle that we've robbed you of the chance to grow strong." Reading those words, I realized that Sarah would have understood exactly why I did what I did. She would have seen that sometimes the hardest thing about being a parent is knowing when to step back and let your child learn from their mistakes, even when those mistakes are painful. I showed the letter to David during one of our dinners together. He read it quietly, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he said when he finished, "Mom was right. You guys always rescued me, and I never learned to rescue myself. I never learned that my choices had real consequences because you always protected me from them. That's why what you did was so important," he continued. "For the first time in my life, I had to face the full weight of my actions. I had to see what it felt like to lose everything because of my own bad decisions, and I had to see how much I'd hurt someone I loved. It was the wake-up call I needed, even though it was terrifying at the time. We've started a new tradition, David and I. Every Sunday we have dinner together, and we talk honestly about our week, our challenges, our goals. It's not always easy. Sometimes we disagree about things. Sometimes old hurts surface and we have to work through them. But we're committed to being honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Last Sunday, David told me about a situation at his work where he'd been tempted to cut corners on a project to save money. The old David might have done it, he said. But I kept thinking about what you taught me about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. So I told my boss the truth about what the project would really cost, even though I knew he wouldn't like it. "And what happened?" I asked. "He wasn't happy about the extra cost," David said, "but he respected my honesty. He said he'd rather work with someone who tells him the truth up front than someone who promises the impossible and then can't deliver. It reminded me of something you used to tell me when I was a kid, about how your reputation is the most valuable thing you own. These conversations give me hope. They show me that David really is changing, that he's learning to make decisions based on principles rather than just immediate convenience. They show me that the lesson I taught him is taking root and growing into something positive. I've also started sharing some of my own struggles with David. I told him about how lonely I've been since his mother died, about how some days I feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of maintaining this big house by myself. I told him about my fears of getting older, of becoming dependent, of being a burden to others. "Dad," he said, "you could never be a burden to me, not anymore. I understand now what family really means. It means being there for each other, supporting each other, taking care of each other. It doesn't mean taking advantage of each other or seeing each other as obstacles to overcome. We've also talked about the future. David has suggested that when I'm ready, when I feel like I need more help with daily tasks, he'd like to move back into this house to take care of me. Not to take over, not to push me out, but to be here as my son, as my caregiver, as my family. I'm not ready for that yet, and I may never be. But it means everything to me that he offered, and that he offered it in the right spirit. It shows me that he understands the difference between helping someone and taking advantage of them. Margaret Chen, the city councilwoman I mentioned earlier, has asked me to speak at a community meeting about elder abuse. She wants me to share my story as an example of how seniors can protect themselves and fight back when family members try to take advantage of them. I've agreed to do it, not because I want attention or sympathy, but because I think other people need to hear that they don't have to be victims. They need to know that being old doesn't mean being powerless. They need to understand that they have rights and resources and people who will help them if they're brave enough to ask. David has offered to come with me to the meeting. He wants to share his side of the story, to talk about what led him to make such terrible decisions and what he's learned from the consequences. He thinks it might help other families avoid going through what we went through. I'm proud of him for being willing to do that. It takes courage to admit your mistakes in public, to let people see your failures and your growth. But I think it will be powerful for people to hear from both sides, to understand how these situations develop and how they can be resolved. The meeting is next month, and I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm also excited. If our story can help even one family avoid the pain we went through, or help one senior citizen stand up for themselves, then everything we've been through will have been worth it. Tom Rodriguez, my construction friend, stopped by last week to check on me. He brought his grandson with him, a boy about 12 years old who's interested in learning carpentry. Tom asked if I'd be willing to teach the boy some basic skills to pass on some of the knowledge I've accumulated over the years. I said yes, of course. There's something satisfying about teaching young people, about sharing what you know with the next generation. The boy, whose name is Miguel, reminds me a little of David when he was that age. Eager to learn, full of questions, excited about building things with his hands. David came over while I was showing Miguel how to properly hold a hammer, how to drive a nail without bending it. He watched for a while, then asked if he could join the lesson. I haven't done this kind of work in years, he said. I'd forgotten how much I used to enjoy it when you taught me. So now we have a little carpentry club that meets every Saturday morning. David, Miguel and me, working on small projects in my garage workshop. We're building a birdhouse this week, and next week we're going to start on a small bookshelf for Miguel's room. It's become one of my favorite times of the week. There's something healing about working with your hands, about creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials. And there's something even more healing about doing it with family, about passing on traditions and skills and values to the next generation. Miguel asked me last week why David and I seem so different from other fathers and sons he knows. Most of the time, he said, older people and younger people don't seem to understand each other very well. But you guys seem to really listen to each other and respect each other. I thought about how to answer that. Miguel, I said, David and I went through a very difficult time not too long ago. We hurt each other, and we had to learn how to forgive each other and rebuild our relationship. Sometimes it takes going through something hard together to really understand what's important. David nodded. We learned that family isn't just about being related to each other, he said. It's about choosing to treat each other with love and respect, even when it's difficult. It's about being honest with each other, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And it's about being willing to change and grow, even when you're older and set in your ways. I think Miguel understood, at least as much as a 12-year-old can. He's a smart kid, and he's lucky to have a grandfather like Tom who cares about teaching him important life lessons. I hope he never has to go through what David and I went through. But if he does, I hope he'll remember what we talked about. As I sit here now, finishing this story, I can see David's car pulling into my driveway. He's coming for our Sunday dinner, just like he has every week for the past month. He'll probably bring flowers for his mother's grave, which we'll visit together after we eat. And he'll probably stay to help me with some small task around the house, not because I need the help, but because he wants to be useful, wants to contribute. This is what family looks like when it's working the way it should. Not perfect, not without problems or disagreements, but honest and respectful and loving. It took us a long time to get here, and it took some very hard lessons, but we made it. The doorbell just rang. That's David now, probably with groceries for dinner, and maybe some flowers from the garden center. He's been bringing me fresh flowers every week since we reconciled, saying that Mom would have wanted the house to always have fresh flowers in it. I can hear him in the kitchen now, unpacking groceries and starting to prepare our meal. He's become a pretty good cook since he's been living on his own and trying to save money. It's one of the many ways he's grown and changed since this whole ordeal began. David, I called out, what are we having for dinner? Pot roast, Dad, he called back, the way Mom used to make it. I found a recipe in that old cookbook of hers. It's going to take a couple hours to cook, so we have time to work on that birdhouse if you want. That sounds perfect, I said. And it does. It sounds like exactly what a Sunday afternoon should be. A father and son working together, sharing a meal, talking about life. Simple things that mean everything when you almost lose them. You know, there are still days when I think about what might have happened if I hadn't fought back. If I'd just accepted David's eviction notice and moved out quietly, I probably would have ended up in some small apartment somewhere, bitter and alone, watching my son sell the house Sarah and I built together. David would have gotten his money, but he never would have learned his lesson. He would have continued making the same mistakes, taking advantage of people who loved him, never understanding the real value of family and respect. And eventually, he would have lost everything anyway, because money obtained through betrayal never lasts. Instead, we both learned something valuable. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. And David learned that actions have consequences, that family means responsibility as well as love, and that some things are more important than money. The smell of pot roast is starting to fill the house now, and it brings back so many memories of Sunday dinners with Sarah. She would have loved seeing David and me working together again, talking and laughing like we used to when he was young. She always believed that love could overcome anything if people were willing to work at it. I think about the other families out there who might be going through something similar. Adult children who see their aging parents as burdens or opportunities rather than people deserving of respect. Elderly people who are being taken advantage of by the very people who should be protecting them. If you're in a situation like that, please know that you don't have to accept it. You have rights. You have options. You have people who will help you if you're brave enough to ask. Don't let anyone convince you that you're powerless just because you're older. And if you're someone who has been taking advantage of an elderly family member, it's not too late to change. It's not too late to do the right thing. But understand that making things right might require more than just an apology. It might require real change, real accountability, real work to rebuild trust. David just came in from the garage with the birdhouse we've been working on. "Dad," he said, "I think we're ready to paint it. What color do you think Mom would have liked?" I smiled. "She always loved yellow," I said. "Bright, cheerful yellow like the roses she planted in the front yard." "Yellow it is," he said. "And maybe we can plant some yellow flowers around the base of the tree where we're going to hang it. That way it'll be like a little memorial garden for her. I think she'd like that." "Yes," I said, "I think she would." Sarah always loved projects that brought the family together. She would have been so proud to see us working side by side again, building something beautiful together instead of tearing each other apart. The timer just went off in the kitchen. That means the pot roast is ready. David and I will sit down to dinner soon, and we'll talk about our week, our plans, our hopes for the future. We'll probably look through some old photo albums after dinner, remembering the good times and talking about the lessons we've learned. It's a simple life, but it's a good life. It's a life built on respect and honesty and love. It's the kind of life Sarah always wanted for our family, and it's the kind of life I'm proud to be living now. So that's my story. That's how my son tried to evict me from my own house, and how I ended up handing him an eviction notice instead. It's a story about family, about consequences, about second chances, and about the fact that it's never too late to learn important lessons about how to treat the people you love. If you're dealing with family members who are taking advantage of you, remember that you have rights. Remember that you deserve to be treated with respect, no matter how old you are. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stand up for yourself and let people face the consequences of their actions. If you're someone who has made mistakes with your family, remember that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to apologize, to make amends, to prove that you can be better than you were. But remember that earning back trust takes time, patience, and consistent good choices. Family is complicated. Family is messy. Family can hurt you deeper than anyone else can. But family can also love you, forgive you, and give you chances to be better than you thought you could be. The key is making sure that love goes both ways, and that respect is part of the foundation. I'm 68 years old, and I learned something important these past few weeks. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I learned that I don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. And I learned that sometimes the best gift you can give someone you love is the chance to learn from their mistakes and become a better person. David is still renting his house from me, and he's still working to rebuild his life and our relationship. But every month when he pays his rent on time, every week when he calls to check on me, every time he treats me with the respect I deserve, I see the man he's becoming, and that man is someone I'm proud to call my son. So tell me, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back the way I did, or would you have handled it differently? And what city are you listening from? I'd love to know that this story reached people all around the world, people who understand that family means love, but it also means respect.